Welcome, everyone, to the onpoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, well, Ontario's Auditor General releases her annual look at how well your government spends your money, and she's less than impressed with what she's discovered about our healthcare system.
The province has introduced a new justice and crime bill. We'll tell you what they've got in mind.
Better call Paul again. Education Minister Paul Calandra has released the long-awaited EQAO scores and will appoint an advisory panel to make recommendations on the test because the progress seen, he says, ain't good enough.
And in your column, my column, I'll look at the latest twist in the province's alcohol bottle recycling system.
And I'll shine a spotlight on yet another well-deserved tribute to former Ontario Member of Parliament Ken Dryden, this time from his alma mater in New York State.
It's Friday, December 5th, 2025, so let's get to it.
JMM.
Steve?
A little sugar? We're in December already.
I know. Where did the year go?
December sugar. I love the fact that you have an Imperial Stormtrooper on your chest today, along with, what do you call that?
It's a Christmas sweater of the Stormtrooper, and we've got a TIE fighter here.
A TIE fighter, that's it.
And various other Star Wars insignia.
And again, I'm always looking for a particular hook to the moment. Is there a particular hook to the moment for this shirt?
Well, it's the first week in December. It's the holiday season. You had to imagine that I would both own a Christmas-style sweater and that it would also be Star Wars themed, knowing me as you do. So that's what I went with.
Okay, I got it. Well, I'm going to talk about a guy that I don't think we've ever talked about on this program before. His name is Howard Ferguson, and I'm going to do my little stand-up so everybody can see what he looks like. There he is. That's Howard Ferguson. Howard Ferguson was the Premier of Ontario a long time ago. He actually won his second consecutive election 96 years ago this week. He was our ninth premier. He served in total from 1923 to 1930, won 3 elections during that time. How do I put this? He called an early election during his second mandate and then won a third. Does that sound familiar at all?
It's starting to ring some bells, yeah.
Pretty sure a guy named Ford just managed to pull that off earlier this year as well. Ferguson was a bit well known for a bunch of things. Number one, he defeated remember last week we talked about Ernest Drury, who was the one and only United Farmers of Ontario Premier.
Yes.
He defeated Drury in 1923 after just one term. So Ferguson is famous for that. He's also well known, we're going to talk booze here for a second. He's well known for having a plebiscite on whether conditions for selling booze in the province of Ontario should be loosened up. He obviously wanted more tax revenue to support his programs, and he thought if we sell more booze, we'll get more revenue, we can offer more programs. The plebiscite passed. And after that, beer became known as Fergie's Foam. Fergie's Foam. That's what they called beer back in the day. And he also then went on to create a new provincial institution that would sort of regulate and oversee the purchase and sale of alcohol in the province of Ontario. Can you imagine what that was called?
Was it called the LCBO at its inception?
Correct.
Okay.
There you go. Liquor Control Board of Ontario,
right. The
LCBO. We have Howard Ferguson to thank for that. After his career as premier was over in 1930, he actually kept going. He got appointed to be the High Commissioner to Great Britain, so his public life did not end after that. And I see Matthew O'Meara sending me a note here saying, "What's a plebiscite? Explain what a plebiscite is." Really, Matthew? You don't think people know what a plebiscite is?
A non-binding referendum.
Well, it's a referendum. Yeah, exactly right. It had a province-wide vote about the thing. Okay, Matthew. Now we're all happy here. If you want to go visit Howard Ferguson, you can. Because like many other Ontario First Ministers, guess where he's buried?
Over at Mount Pleasant.
He is at Mount Pleasant, half an hour walk away from here where we are right now. And if you hang out at Queen's Park, there is something called, there's the picture of his headstone, which I snapped one day. And if you go to Queen's Park, there is they got a McDonald block, a Hepburn block, a Frost block, and they have a Ferguson block. And the Ferguson block is named after this guy right here, G. Howard Ferguson. And while we're on the subject, I'm not done yet. While we're on the subject, somebody passed Howard Ferguson in terms of time spent in office this very week.
Yeah.
And that premier's name is Doug Ford. Doug Ford has now been premier for 7 years, 5 months, and 4 days, I think, which means he has passed Howard Ferguson for the 8th longest serving premier of all time. We've had 26 premiers.
Right.
Ford is number 26. He's already the 8th longest serving premier of all time, having just passed Howard Ferguson this week. Any other useless trivia you want to know, or should we move on?
I think we can move on.
We're moving on. On to issue 1. Well, it's one of the opposition and media's favorite days on the Queen's Park calendar, the annual report of the Auditor General on how well the government is spending the dollars you send to Ontario, Inc. The auditor is a nonpartisan appointee who reports not to the government, but rather to the entire legislature. And her mission is to send investigators into various ministries, pull back the curtain, and ensure budgets are being well spent. JMM, what seems to have captivated the auditor and the critics of the government this year?
The report this year there's always a bunch of different chunks to the auditor's report, and some of this is just like her statutory obligations to audit the province's books. But then there are always the juicier topics that the reporters like to dive into. And so in this year, they're calling them performance audits. In previous years, they've been called value for money audits, but this is where the auditor looks at specific departments or agencies within the government and looks at how well the money is being spent. Are there redundant operations? Are there wasteful operations? Are there operations that are not meeting best practices in other provinces? And so this year, the auditor really narrowly focused on healthcare, with one exception, which I'll get into. But there are multiple chapters about different types of what you could broadly call sort of healthcare issues. So the auditor looked at access to primary care, looked at physician billing, looked at how we educate family doctors in the province, and procuring personal protective equipment for hospitals and long-term care homes. And, generally, if the auditor has written a substantial chapter about an issue, it's not usually good news for the government.
Yes.
And so in this case, of course, in all of these areas, the auditor found cases where the government could be minding public money more carefully. Two areas that I think got the most attention from reporters were physician billing and the procurement audits. Physician billing, of course, is a long-standing issue in the province. There have been, certainly since I started at Queen's Park, going back more than a decade, there have been reports of doctors who, the way we pay doctors in Ontario is the doctor performs a service and then they bill OHIP for that service. And there are reported cases of doctors billing the province for having done more than 24 hours of work in a day, sometimes having billed for doing more than 365 days of work in a year. These are the kinds of things that ought to raise red flags. And the auditor is careful to say that she can't, directly say that these things are fraudulent. They might just be paperwork errors. But the key thing to understand is that the province doesn't actually have any automated system to flag these kinds of cases for further investigation. The province basically relies on tips and complaints from the public to determine whether there's something to investigate. So, why does that matter? Well, we spent $20 billion a year on physician payments, most of that, but not entirely, through the fee-for-service system. So even if the government's estimate of something like 3 to 5% of billing might be potentially problematic, that's hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's real money. Yeah. So again, the issue is not that we can say directly that this is all fraudulent, but the province doesn't actually have any system to check, like the way, my credit card company is pretty on the ball if they think that there's been a fraudulent or an unusual purchase with my MasterCard. I think maybe the province of Ontario could reasonably be said to need something similar.
And just to understand the scope of her mission here, she does not actually have the authority then to go after doctors and get them to repay if they've overdrawn. This is criticism of the health ministry's lack of due diligence. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. The Ministry of Health can and has these measures and does, periodically find cases where they say to a doctor, like, nice try, give us the money back. And they say they've recovered something like $8 million over a period of several years. Maybe, let's be optimistic, maybe Ontario is just running the cleanest public healthcare system in the world, and there's no further fraud to be found. Or maybe the fact that we only have, I think she said, 8 staff tasked with doing these kinds of investigations. Maybe that's the bottleneck, and maybe we should get a bit more aggressive with our investigations.
Okay, staying with healthcare, we all remember back in the days of COVID, the three letters PPE became extremely famous, personal protective equipment. What did the auditor have to say about the status of that?
So the government created Supply Ontario for the purpose of making sure that we were never caught unawares, suddenly relying on other countries, other jurisdictions for the PPE that we needed. Because obviously people remember, that mad scramble to find masks and gloves and sanitizers in that first year of the pandemic. And it took a while to get the agency up and running. It was actually, I think, only formally given control of some of these stockpiles after we had sort of all but declared the pandemic over in 2022. But nevertheless, it exists now. And wouldn't you know it, we are actually getting rid of expired inventory faster than we are using it, i.e., we are throwing stuff out, or in at least some cases incinerating it, because it has gone unused, sitting in warehouses, faster than it is being distributed to hospitals or long-term care homes.
Can I ask what I think is a reasonable question?
Yes.
How does that happen exactly?
So, in other provinces, an agency like Supply Ontario would be the sole purchaser of PPE for hospitals and long-term care homes and the healthcare sector, or however you want to define that, right? And there are reasons why you would want to do that, right? A single agency could get bulk discounts, that kind of thing. We don't do that in Ontario. The hospitals procure their own PPE, and then Supply Ontario also engages in these long-term contracts to, remember, its mission is also to ensure that this equipment is made in Ontario, right? And so in order to give investors and manufacturers the confidence that they are going to continue to have a customer, that they're going to invest in building these things here in Ontario, you sign these long-term contracts. But as the auditor explained, given how slowly we are actually using this stuff, and the hospitals are all ordering their own supplies of this stuff, at the current rates, we are in this sort of permanent disequilibrium where we are always going to be having more stuff expire than we are actually using. It's just, it is not it's not currently a rational setup.
Okay, I shouldn't be laughing about it because it is what it is. Let's do one more thing that the Auditor General might have looked to. This government has spent a lot of time trying to tell people that they are doing a lot as it relates to connecting patients with primary care doctors. What did the auditor have to say about that?
Right. The auditor is a bit more skeptical of some of the numbers that the government has put out, if I could put it that way. They think that the government is understating, how many people are going without a primary care physician. The government has used the number, I believe, of 1.3 million. The Auditor General, based on external research, suggests that number could be more like 2 million. And then consequently, if there are more people in need of primary care, then that also means we need to train more primary care doctors. And this is where you get into questions of, for example, are we educating, have we created that pipeline to educate enough primary care physicians? And there was a whole other section in the audit about that. And there's some interesting sort of granular details about why that's not working as well as it should. But I think one telling detail here, the McGuinty government in 2009 created something called Healthcare Connect, a service to try and match people to primary care physicians who are open to taking on new patients. And the relative good news is that a substantial fraction of people are getting connected with doctors within let's call it a not insane timeline. But the general sense in the sector is that the Healthcare Connect tool is bad, is not working, is certainly not working as well as similar tools in other jurisdictions. And according to one document quoted by the auditor, it is no longer fit for purpose. And the participants in the healthcare sector do not want the government to fix this tool. They say it is so thoroughly broken and obsolete that they just want the government to start over from a clean sheet of paper.
Not fit for purpose.
Yes.
That's a nice way of saying...
just totally broken and beyond repair. Burn it down.
I guess one last thing on this. We should say, You know, it is the auditor's mission, essentially, to go into these ministries, do their investigation, not for the purposes of necessarily naming and shaming people who've screwed up along the way, but because, you know, some of these departments are so massive. It is the case that a lot of people who work in these ministries don't know what's going on in their own ministries. The auditor goes in, investigates, lets the ministries know what's going on, and then theoretically what's supposed to happen is, now that we've found out about this, we can fix this. That's what's supposed to happen. And I think that actually does happen most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a handful of exceptions, well, I'll get to that in a moment. The government accepted all of the auditor's recommendations for changes in all of these healthcare sections. I've mentioned the exception to all of the healthcare news. The auditor did also have a chapter about recycling, and also, again, as part of her statutory work, she is required to do a report on the functioning of the Environmental Bill of Rights. There were some. As you might imagine, this government has a checkered history with environmental issues, and the auditor had some criticism about how they have used or have gotten around the Environmental Bill of Rights. This was one of the few areas where the government did not accept the auditor's recommendations because she basically asked them to stop going around the Environmental Bill of Rights, and they said, no, we reserve the right to continue doing that.
And legally, they can do that, and
yes.
You know, if they're prepared to pay whatever political price there is to pay at the next election.
Yes.
Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't.
Yes, and we will see if some price is yet to be paid. It hasn't so far.
That is the answer to everything. We shall see. And with that, we're off to issue 2. The government introduced the Keeping Criminals Behind Bars Act last week and includes several legislative changes designed to do everything from reforming the bail system to protecting cats and dogs from animal testing. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty on this.
Absolutely. So I think that the headline item that the government introduced here, it would require people accused of crimes to present cash security deposits for bail. Currently, a person could be released on a promise to pay. So now they would actually have to put cash on the table. And they also want to introduce a user fee for GPS monitoring devices. There are some interesting questions about the constitutionality here. I mean, it won't surprise people to learn that there are already people speculating about a potential charter breach with this, right? We've said this before on the podcast, and I will just remind people, like people who are out on bail are not yet convicted of any crime. They are thus constitutionally innocent. And so there are questions about how you can treat people like that. There's also an interesting issue about, like, generally speaking, the matters around bail are a federal criminal matter. And so there's a question here of whether a court will say that Ontario is simply intruding on a matter of federal jurisdiction. Or as one lawyer I saw put it, this bill might manage to be unconstitutional twice. So, you know, we will leave that to the courts, but I think it's a very interesting one. To the government's defense here, and the government's defense here, you know, matters of the administration of courts are also provincial jurisdictions. So this is one of those areas where I could easily see a court going either way in terms of deciding the constitutionality of this. The legislation is also proposing to make certain information from the Ontario Sex Offender and Trafficker Registry publicly available. This is something that various groups have advocated for. I will confess that this is not something that a controversy I'm super read in on, but I do know that people have been fighting to get this information made public, and both Liberal and, at least for several years before now, the provincial Conservative government resisted some of those efforts. Advocates saying that, you know, this information will hold offenders accountable. And of course, now we get to the cats and dogs. The legislation would amend the Animals for Research Act to prohibit invasive medical research on dogs and cats. It also bans the breeding of dogs and cats for research purposes at Ontario facilities, although some critics have said those same animals could be sourced from pounds or other potential shelters.
Where did this thing come from?
This is one of those things where I think this is like the Premier's personality. Like every once in a while, this comes out that he's like an animal lover, and he has proposed some of these measures. When there is a really strong counter lobby, the animal lover side doesn't always win the day, if I could put it that way, right? Like a few years back, the government amended some farm legislation to make it harder for animal rights activists to document abuses. But that's because there's a very important agricultural lobby in Ontario, right? So back in August, the Investigative Journalism Bureau, which is associated with the University of Toronto, published a story that detailed experiments done on beagles in London, Ontario. Beagle's a cute dog, I guess.
Yes.
Yes. I'm allowed to editorialize that beagles are cute, right?
Beagle is a cute dog. That is correct. Yeah.
The premier saw this story, spoke about it at a press conference, and
Got a little choked up, actually.
Yeah, like it seemed to really sort of animate him. And on the sort of more crass political side of things, we can say like, this is an easy win politically. I don't think there's a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to defend animal testing on beagles. And in fact, the lab in question did try to issue a defense saying that this is important medical research. And I'm sure that they're not doing it for cruelty's sake, but they seem to have lost the argument with the government. Let me put it that way.
We're going to make a bit of a hard turn here because we're going to talk about something quite tragic now. We're going to talk about something called Andrew's Law, which is a reference to Andrew Cristillo, who is the father of 3 who was killed by a driver charged with dangerous and stunt driving. This is the same driver, incidentally, who hit an OPP vehicle that Premier Doug Ford was traveling in at the time. So let's get the details on this if we can.
So under Andrew's Law, as proposed, anybody who is convicted of dangerous driving causing death will receive a lifetime ban from getting behind the wheel. Police can also immediately suspend a driver's license for 90 days if they suspect the driver is driving dangerously. The government is also proposing to increase fines for those driving with suspended licenses and doubling fines for distracted driving if you're in a commercial vehicle. So it's not just members of the general public, people who are specifically operating commercial vehicles could see increased penalties. And they also, and this I think is maybe the item that got the most attention, they are also going to consult the public on making, I guess, a new class of penalty for impaired drivers who cause the death of a parent or a guardian. The impaired driver would then be responsible for financially supporting the victim's children.
I'm going to repeat what you just said a moment ago, which is to say that none of these charges has been tested in court yet.
Yes.
Somebody is innocent until proven guilty. But you got to be some kind of stupid if you go out and you sideswipe the Premier of Ontario's car and then follow that up again, allegedly, by driving so irresponsibly that the result is the death of this father. That's the charge. The courts will render their verdict on whatever happens in the days ahead. But some days you really do have to scratch your head and say, what the actual bleepity bleep is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I will make 2 points. One sort of general, a bit more specific. In general, I think we do not take automotive crime super seriously in the law. Speaking as a cyclist who, when we talk about the deaths of vulnerable road users, I think even with this law, there are going to be large areas, where we still do not take it seriously enough. But quite aside from my hobby horses, the more specific thing I would say is that I think a lot of risky road behavior, if I could put it, antisocial road behavior, got a lot worse during COVID. This isn't just me hypothesizing. There's measurable data about, speeding increased because, we're talking about COVID a lot in this episode, but the roads were so empty for a while there. A lot of people took that as license to just act like maniacs. And I think a lot of that stuff has not been dialed back yet. And so I certainly hope that this will be part of taking people's conduct on the road more seriously. But this is not, again, to editorialize, I don't think this will be enough on its own. I think we need more seriousness, not just from the laws that the government passes, but going all the way down to, what kinds of behaviors police officers on the street are going to actually stop and punish.
Understood. And with that, we're on to issue 3. The Education Quality and Accountability Office, or EQAO as it's commonly known, usually releases its scores in September or October, but Education Minister Paul Calandra had been holding on to the information to take a, quote, deep dive into the numbers. Now the numbers are out, and Calandra says he will be appointing an advisory body to examine the test because, he says, the progress made isn't good enough. JMM, let's take our own deep dive into the numbers, if you would.
Right. So very quickly, the EQAO tests kids in grade 3, 6, and 9. So for grade 3 students in Ontario, 74% of students met the provincial standard for reading, 65% for writing, and 64% for math. Grade 6 students, it was 86% for reading, 85% for writing, but only 51% for math,
Yikes.
although that was a small increase from the previous year. Grade 9 students, this is not directly comparable because high schools are not directly comparable to the elementaries, but 58% met the provincial standard for math. That was a 4% improvement for the previous year. And 85% of students who wrote the Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test were successful. So generally speaking, some decent numbers, some good results for reading and writing, but students really struggling in some cases with math scores. The improvements that we did see were small, and this is the line coming out of the government this week that the progress that we are seeing is not fast enough for their liking. And so this week, Education Minister Paul Calandra announced that he will be naming 2 people to examine EQAO testing and provide recommendations to the government about how the system might be improved. We don't know who those people are. He's going to formally name them in the new year. They will be paid. These are not going to be volunteer positions, as they never are. They are going to be paid something like $1,500 a day for their work. So we will see if we get our money's worth for that. Meanwhile, of course, some groups have always criticized the whole process of the EQAO. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, for example, says that these tests don't really add any utility to classroom, don't really improve student outcomes on their own, and the government should just scrap it and redirect those funds to classrooms.
I don't know if that's true or false. I just don't know. But I know how we got these tests in the first place, which is you got to go back about 30 years to the Mike Harris government, which looked at the education system in the province. And I think Premier Harris asked a reasonable question, which is, how do we know whether or not our students are actually getting well educated? Yeah. How do we know if they're improving? What independent metrics can we look at and say, oh, we are better now than we were 10 years ago? And the answer, apparently, that at least the story I've heard, the answer that came back to him was, well, we don't have anything. And as a result, I think on the recommendation, actually, of a former New Democrat education minister named Dave Cook, whom he appointed to head up a panel, the Harris government came in with the EQAO and decided to put these tests out every year, which of course has begat a whole other series of criticisms like, well, now teachers teach to the test and they don't, it's really not a good indication of how well kids are doing one way or the other. Anyway, it's a humongous debate, has been for 30 years, not going to go away anytime soon, but we press on. One of the reporters, speaking of pressing, one of the reporters at the press conference asked whether the government could ignore the recommendations from the panel, much as they did with the Blue Ribbon panel on post-secondary education, whose recommendations they ignored. It's possible that the panel could come back and echo what the teacher union said, smaller class sizes, more funding, hire more teachers, scrap the test. That's possible, I suppose, isn't it?
It's a big old world. Lots of things are possible. The minister did not want to rule out any specific outcomes. He did seem to want to leave a pretty open, wanted to leave those possibilities open. About the only thing that he did explicitly rule out was the idea of scrapping EQAO itself. He said he doesn't expect that to be in the offing.
Well, if the minister usually the way this works is, you can recommend anything you want, but if you recommend this, forget it. It ain't going to happen. Yeah. So, stick to your lane is usually the way these orders go out. There was a kind of a funny moment at the press conference, speaking of Better Call Paul, as in Paul Calandra, which we have taken to calling him because he seems to be, every time the Premier's got a problem, Better Call Paul, unlike Better Call Saul, the old TV show. Yes. But, there's been a great debate about the advisability of allowing students to have cell phones in classes. And this government has banned the use of cell phones in classes, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, as we shall see from this moment in Paul Calandra's news conference. Roll it, please.
But my daughter called me. She's a grade 12 student, and she called me from her class because she needed help on something. And I asked her, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Can you just help me on something?" I said, "But you're not supposed to have the phone in the class." She says, "Well, it's just for this one thing." I said, "I'm the Minister of Education. I ban phones in the class, right?" She says, "Just for this one thing. Nobody will notice, and then can we go back?" And I said, so I gave her the answer. And was it the right answer? I don't know. She didn't get mad at me, but it wasn't EQAO. But
First of all, kudos to him for fessing up, because there he is, just being a normal parent like everybody else whose kids call from class and they're not supposed to. And he gave that was kind of funny. So we just thought we'd play that. But,
I'm not sure which side of this I love more. The father struggling to impose any kind of discipline or order on their child, the Minister of Education struggling to get his policies actually adhered to by a school board.
Someone in his own home.
I loved all of it, and that was why I recommended that we use that clip.
Good call, good call. Now, also during this press conference, Paul Calandra mentioned that the Near North District School Board, that includes Parry Sound, Nipissing, North Bay, it is the latest school board in the province of Ontario to be put what they call under supervision. Essentially, it means we're taking over. And Mr. Calandra has suggested that there was widespread incompetence by trustees and board members. So once again, better call Paul.
Yes. And now this is the sixth board to be placed under supervision in the province this year, I guess. Or the controversy in this case, and this I first got wind of back in August when we were at AMO with the TVO doing the production there. I was once again fortunate enough to moderate the ministers' forum, what we call the bear pit, where people pelt cabinet ministers with questions, not rotten fruit. And this came up, this issue of the Near North School Board, because a local municipal councillor, not a school board trustee, a municipal councillor, was complaining because this school board had started construction of a new school that was supposed to accept high school students. The school was not ready. It was not going to be ready in time for the new school year. And so the school board had to send the student body to, at least some of them got sent to the partially demolished old school while they were waiting for this new school to be complete. And moderating the ministers' forum is like, it can be very distracting. There's lots of things going on, but that was one of those times where I heard that from the floor and I looked over at the minister and I was like, this is not going to be the last time we hear about this story. And sure enough,
correct.
This is the latest school board to be put under direct supervision. The minister will actually then later name a supervisor who will take it over. But at the moment, it's literally the Minister of Education issuing the directives directly.
And what happens now?
Well, so the as I say, the province will appoint a supervisor. They will have to, undergo the work to right the ship of, not exactly a ship of state, but
ship of municipality.
Yeah, writing the ship of the school board. The director of education, who is sort of the head civil servant, not an elected trustee within the school board system. They have been put on leave, according to the minister this week. We've mentioned before that these supervisors, again, they don't work for free, and the costs of the supervisors sometimes exceed the costs of the scandal that prompted them being appointed. I don't know exactly what the costs of everything going on in Near North School Board are here, so I don't want to prejudge that outcome here, but I just mentioned it because we've mentioned it before.
But you know what the supervisor is going to get paid.
Yes, we do. That something like that. They can charge up to $350,000 a year if the similar practice that we saw in other school boards will continue. And of course, this is not all happening in a political vacuum. The minister did allude to legislation he will be bringing in the new year that could affect the fate of all, at least, English language public school boards. He seems to be leaving the question of Catholic school boards alone. That is a hot potato or a third rail he does not want to touch. And he's also not wanting to disrupt French language school boards because they have charter protections. But he did say once again at this week's press conference that, I'm trying to remember the exact wording he used, but it was something like nothing he's seen in the last year has changed his mind about the fate of school board trustees, and that the governance of school boards is not being well served by elected trustees.
I would make one observation, which is if you go back 100 years and to today, whether it was Resolution 17 banning the teaching of French in schools, whether it was extending public funding to Catholic schools in 1984, whether it was offering faith-based funding to public schools in 2007, as a former Progressive Conservative Party leader tried to do, the mixture of religion, politics, and education in Ontario rarely ends well. So you got to be careful on that one.
Absolutely.
And with that, it's off to your column, my column. Time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns that we wrote for TVO.org over the past week. You can always go find them. We chat about them here in the hopes that it will encourage you to go online and look for them. What did you write about this week you want to bring our attention to?
I'm actually going to bring a column that I wrote last week in because I didn't get to talk about it last week, but we have a settlement between the government, the beer store, and the grocers, and we've been keeping an eye on this topic for a while now, all year. The question was, what would be the fate of the Ontario Deposit Return Program? This is the program that allows you to return empty beer and wine bottles and cans to the beer store, collect your nickels. And it's an incredibly successful recycling program, but with the sale of beer and wine in grocery stores and corner stores, this has been an open question. What would the fate of the deposit return program be? And we now know that grocery stores are going to pay the beer store to continue operating the deposit return program. And on the one hand, the government says, hey, like, this is good news. Deposit return will continue. This was always something that was in the cards, or at least a potential vision of how this program would continue, with basically just the grocery stores paying the beer store to just continue the operations of the program. But the question that I have, and the question I raised in this column, it looks to me a lot more like a retreat. The government is substantially expanding the radius that each individual recycling point will be allowed to serve. They used to seem to say that if you were more than 5 kilometers away from a beer store, that a grocery store would have to accept empties. They're now saying that the vast majority of Ontarians will be within 10 kilometers of a recycling point. Now,
this is getting pretty into the nitty gritty here.
Well,
right?
so here we are at Yonge and Eglinton in Toronto, in Midtown Toronto. If there were a beer store under our feet, that single location could serve almost the entire city of Toronto, and the beer store would get to say that they were in compliance with this new standard. Mm-hmm. I'm not actually worried about Toronto, though, right? What I'm worried about is mostly towns in northern and rural Ontario. These are places where in some cases, the beer stores have already closed down, or they are likely to in the near future. And these are places where you're not talking about having to drive an extra 10 minutes to find a recycling point. You're talking about there being no recycling point anymore. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that this, as I say, this incredibly successful recycling program is going to stop working in big chunks of the province, and that's going to mean that a lot more stuff ends up going to landfills. That is going to be eventually something that is paid for by taxpayers. Maybe I'm being overly alarmist. Maybe everything will work out fine, but it is a concern that I thought I would raise for our readers.
You, overly alarmist? Never.
Me, focused on some obscure point of municipal policy?
That never happens.
What podcast is this? How about you?
Well, I wanted to talk about Ken Dryden again.
Okay.
Ken Dryden, of course, the Hall of Fame goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens, former president of the Toronto Maple Leafs, former member of Parliament, former cabinet minister, died a few months ago, quite unexpectedly, of cancer, age 78. Ken Dryden has been honored by his former colleagues on Parliament Hill. He was given tributes in the House of Commons. He was honored at the Bell Centre because, of course, 6 cups in 8 years will get you that when you're the goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens. And recently, he was honored by his alma mater, which is Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. The guy who's, I think, the Dean of Arts and Sciences is a guy named Peter Lowen. And Peter used to be at the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. Peter called me up one day and he said, we're going to do a tribute game to Ken Dryden because he was such a star here. I think Ken Dryden was the goaltender for 3 seasons at Cornell and had a record of something like 80 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie, something like that. I might be a tiny bit off on the numbers, but it's that dramatic. So he said, we're going to do a big tribute to him. Do you want to come down and see the game with me? I thought, damn right I do. So drove 5 hours to go to Ithaca for this game. Ken's presence is all over the arena, right? He played there in the 1960s, so it's been a long time. His presence is all over the arena. Here we go. We're going to go through some pictures, and I'll describe for those listening on podcast what we're seeing here. These are the rafters in the arena, in Cornell's home arena, and, among the ECAC championship banners and so on, there's number 1, retired for Ken Dryden. He wore 29 with the Habs, but number 1 at Cornell, one of only 2 NHL players to have their numbers retired by Cornell, Joe Nieuwendyk and ex-Leaf being the other one. And there's a closer look at it. Number 1, Dryden in the rafters. It just stands out. You can't miss it when you walk in. And if you look at the walls of the arena, in the lobbies and so on, there's Ken with his very famous pose, chin on top of his gloves as the hockey stick is standing straight up. And what else we got? There's Dryden's number 1, another pennant somewhere else in the building indicating that, and another picture on the walls as well. These pictures are all over the arena. This was I guess it's not so big that I should call it a Jumbotron, but it's a fairly big screen. Inside the actual arena itself, they ran a 2-minute video of highlights of Ken's time. Look how young he looked there. Boy, my goodness. Anyway, that was something they did there. At the beginning of a hockey game, they do a ceremonial puck drop often, and it was a friend of Ken's who came out to drop the puck. And normally the team captains do it. This time they had the goalies do it, which was just beautiful. They had 2 goalies come out to take the face off, and the goaltender for Cornell, his last name is Cornwallis, which I see you with a quizzical look on your face, which means that means nothing to you. But
I'm
John
sorry.
Michael, to those of us who watched and were occasionally destroyed by how well the Habs played in the 1970s, Yvon Cornwallis is a former captain of the Montreal Canadiens and teammate of Ken Dryden. So the fact that the goaltender taking the face-off, the fact that his last name was Cornwallis was something I found quite amazing. There's Ken's son, Michael, who's holding up an honorary number 1 Dryden jersey, which the team gave to him. And there's me with my Leaf jersey on, because I'm not wearing a Canadiens jersey, not even for Ken Dryden. There's me with my Leaf jersey, and that's Linda Dryden, Ken's widow, who was at the game, as was his, as you just saw, son Michael and daughter Sarah, and one of Michael's kids, Blake. They were all at the game at Ithaca, New York, and it was a wonderful, wonderful evening in tribute to Ken Dryden. So there, and the column is about all of that. And one more thing, as long as we're speaking of the dear departed among us, there is a tradition at Queen's Park where when a former member of the legislature dies, members of all the parties get up and say, 5 minutes of tribute, pay 5 minutes of tribute to them. And that happened this week for Jim Bradley, the second longest serving MPP of all time at Queen's Park. More than 40 years, a member of the Ontario legislature. Mr. Bradley, of course, was chair of Niagara Region when he died earlier this year. Underwent medical assistance in dying. Yeah. And there was lots of lovely things said about him at Queen's Park earlier this week. Let's have a look at that. Sheldon, if you would.
I can't tell you how many members of the Bradley gang who I've had the privilege of working with on environmental issues over the years who told me they were inspired by Jim. I had the honor of attending Jim's celebration of life, and I want to put on the record what I told Steve Paikin that day. And I quote Mike Schreiner, "Jim Bradley was the leader of the Green Party before there was a Green Party at Queen's Park."
Today I rise, and we stand with the community of St. Catharines and the region of Niagara to honor a man who shaped our city and our province. With every step he took, every hand he shook, and every note he wrote, and every moment he gave. For more than half a century, the Honourable James Joseph Jim Bradley didn't just serve St. Catharines, he loved St. Catharines, and in return, St. Catharines loved him right back.
It's safe to say that Jim Bradley's legacy, his leadership, and what he left behind has had a greater mark on the Niagara region than any other politician for the past century. Jim was a gentleman. He was a humble man. He was a man of faith and of conviction, of tireless interest in his community and his constituents. He was a man defined by a lifetime of service and excellence, and unfailingly a kind man.
Jim was just all heart inside. He was. You can tell because he made sure people got Christmas cards. He didn't forget things. He cared about people. Yeah, he could be grumpy and rough and speak his mind, but at his core, he had a big heart. He had a big heart for this place, and he had a big heart for the people in St. Catharines and all of Niagara, and indeed all of Ontario. And I am just so proud to be able to say a few words and to call him a friend and colleague, and I want to say thank you to the family for sharing him with us. He was a great man. He's unique. There will never, ever, ever be another Jim Bradley. And that's okay. Thank you very much.
Jim Bradley, the former member for St. Catharines, long may his memory be a blessing to us all.
And with that, let's go to the mailbag.
If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it to us at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, fire away.
Today we have a letter from Maurice O'Shaughnessy in Arnprior. Steve and JMM, before Doug's commercial on U.S. tariffs, he was running ads on the Ring of Fire. I found this ad delusional as the one or two of the First Nations oppose this development, and the Attawapiskat First Nation has already set up a camp in the area and are apparently blocking any current activity there. So how does Doug Ford plan to get around this little problem and the expectations inspired by this ad? Maurice O'Shaughnessy, Arnprior, Ontario.
Well, just in case not everybody who is watching or listening to us right now has seen or heard this ad, why don't we play that first?
Absolutely.
Sheldon, if you would.
As Canada faces economic uncertainty, we have a plan to secure our future, and it starts in the Ring of Fire. By developing the land in partnership with First Nations, we'll create economic growth for Indigenous communities. That's how we protect Ontario, made from the Ring of Fire.
Now, in fairness to Mr. Shaughnessy, is it Mr. Shaughnessy? Is that the name? O'Shaughnessy, excuse me. In fairness to Mr. O'Shaughnessy, the Premier's government has inked several deals with several First Nations community along the proposed route into the Ring of Fire. Martin Falls, Webequie, Arrowland First Nations as the most recent examples. There is significant resistance to mining developments. Let's put that on the record. Members from Attawapiskat and Neskantaga First Nations have created a settlement near to a proposed bridge that would link the Ring of Fire to roads that the Ford government is hoping to build. So what's the government actually, I mean, those ads are, lots of upbeat music and pictures of action and, yada, yada, yada. What's the government doing to make this ad a reality?
Well, if I could just put this in context, I mean, we're talking about a part of the North where there have been certainly no less than 6, and I think at some points as many as 20 First Nations involved in various discussions, because it's not just a question of, a road directly to the Ring of Fire itself. We're talking about a network of connections that would include lots of other First Nations. And when you have that many parties involved, negotiations get very complicated. And so one of the things this government has done, in contrast to the Wynne government, I would say one of the ways they've tried to move negotiations forward is really focus on like one-on-one negotiations. Like they're not signing big, 20 person or 20 party agreements with multiple First Nations. They're like nailing an agreement with one or two First Nations at a time. And on that point, money solves a lot of problems in politics, right? Yep. Both Martin Falls and the Webequie First Nation received close to $40 million in exchange for environmental assessments for the proposed roads that they are looking to build. Of course, we're talking about all-season roads. The province does fund winter roads in the north, but one of the economic promises that the Ring of Fire holds for remote First Nations is getting them connected to a permanent road network, something that will last in the summer. The winter road season keeps getting shorter and shorter thanks to climate change, but that's a whole other podcast. In Martin Falls, they are also looking at money to upgrade infrastructure, including a wastewater facility. Martin Falls has been under a boil water advisory for 19 years, apparently. it's not normally provincial responsibility to deal with on-reserve water quality issues. That is usually a federal responsibility. And of course, the federal government has been trying to make progress on water quality issues on reserves, but provincial money spends just as easily as federal money, so they are going to get some money for, again, that wastewater facility.
So some deals are being made with some communities, but others not so. Where are we at?
Right. So some different First Nations have asked for permanent environmental protections to be put in place. We are talking about a part of the province where there's a great deal of peatlands. These are areas of cooler wetlands that sequester a bunch of carbon in the soil. But as you break open those soils to get at precious metals underneath, you can release a lot of the carbon that is locked up in there. I will also point out that a warming Earth will also release a lot of carbon from the peatlands. This is all kind of ironic, given that one of the most recent reasons we've used to justify the exploitation of the Ring of Fire is about the need to get critical minerals for, among others, electric vehicles. So we are greening the Earth, or greening our industry at least, but in parts of the province where there are undeniable environmental sensitivities, maybe there are ways for industry to move forward in ways that are not disruptive and destructive as some of these First Nations fear. The government is pretty gung-ho about this stuff, and it's not entirely clear to me that they're going to wait for all of the environmental niceties to be observed. And of course, certainly the provincial government has really highlighted the Ring of Fire as an area where they want to use the powers they gave themselves under Bill 5 to expedite both the environmental approvals side of things, while also, for example, and while we're talking about Indigenous lands here, they exempted, Bill 5 allows them to exempt projects from things like archaeological assessments, right? So one reason why this is so relevant to Indigenous people is that, there's concerns about disrupting traditional Indigenous burial sites and what kind of obligations people would be owed under provincial law. Currently, if you're digging anywhere in Ontario and you find human remains, I mean, if it looks like it could be an Indigenous burial site, you've got to stop and you've got to assess that, at least in theory, Bill 5 would allow a mine in the Ring of Fire to be opened without paying attention to that kind of thing.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy, we hope that answers your question. And in the meantime, you want to give the email address in case anybody else wants in on this?
Once again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, you can always email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
I'm just having a moment here. Did we do sugar off the top? Does anybody recall?
Yes.
We did do sugar, Greg? Greg says we did sugar.
Okay.
I had this moment where I thought, did I forget to do sugar?
Did we miss our good luck charm?
Let's do it again just to be safe, okay? Because I'd hate to think that I forgot to do it. Somebody actually emailed me one week saying, you forgot to do sugar off the top. Then I went back and looked at the tape, and I did do sugar. They were wrong. But
It's
anyway.
like that time I got accused of saying Lieutenant Governor.
But you actually said lieutenant.
I actually said lieutenant.
Good for you. As one should.
As one
should. That is the On Poly podcast. We better get out of here, okay? That's the On Poly podcast for this Friday, December 5th, 2025.
You can follow the show wherever you get your podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced by Matthew O'Mara, editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Laurie Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is the vice president, programming and content.
We need to hire somebody to ensure that the sugar takes place. We need a new quality control sugar advisor on this program.
Deputy assistant producer in respect of sugar.
Exactly right. Maybe someone on our wonderful crew can assume that responsibility. Well, Greg was on it. Greg has got his hand up. He's in charge. Okay. Thanks, guys, for, as always, setting up the studio and helping us out with making this video podcast happen. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.